Welcome to the Easier Way to Sell presentation of Close the Deal Without Selling. Here's your host and developer of the Easier Way to Sell, Ike Krieger.
Hey, this is Ike Krieger. Welcome back. This is a great episode. It's a little longer than most of our episodes, but every minute is worth it, especially our conversation with Dr. Mark Goulston. You'll find this so valuable that I invite you to listen to it at least a couple times. There are some exercises and ideas in there that I think will make a big difference not only in your communications abilities, but in your life. It's very good. We'll continue on with our examination of the Prelude and layer on another section that you can memorize and start using immediately. Enjoy the episode. Let's pick up the Prelude right where we left off. If they've agreed to the mutually beneficial agreements regarding maybes and I want to think about it, you can move to the next section of the qualification process. Once again, Mr. Prospect, I'm not sure whether or not you have the type of issues our product addresses, but if it turns out that you do and you're going to be the judge of that, once again, this gives them implied control. And you're going to be the judge of that, we're going to have to discuss the budget for this project. If we get to that point in the conversation, how willing are you to share what kind of dollars you have set aside for this? I'm talking ballpark figures. They'll either respond, sure, or we'll see, or no. Either way, you'll be getting the information you need to decide whether to move forward in the communications process. And it's been my experience that they usually say yes, even if that's not their immediate intention. Wait until later to discuss the money issues. You're just setting up the fact that if they believe you can help them with their problem, the topic of paying for that solution is going to come up. Next, we move to the step that helps us make sure that we're meeting with someone that can do more than just say no. We'll pick up our examination of the Prelude in our next episode from right where we left off. You've heard me use the word reframe a whole bunch of times, and I just want to go over that term so that it's clear in everyone's mind. And if you are a new listener, reframes play an important part in the whole process called the easier way to sell. So a reframe allows you to change the way you think about the activities you're involved in. In our case, it allows you to change the way you think about selling so you can change the way you sell. You're out there as a problem solver. That is our reframe for sales. You no longer think about yourself as a salesperson. You're looking at yourself as a magical problem solver. But you have your version of reality. You have your truth. A reframe offers a different and more positive scenario. You've been told that it's okay to fail. You were told that it's human to fail, and it's true. It is okay to fail. However, with a simple reframe, you can create another way to look at nearly any issue, a more positive, productive way. If you're a regular listener, you've heard me say this before. If you're a new listener, here's our reframe for failure. You do not fail. You achieve unplanned outcomes. Using this reframe, you are successful at achieving an outcome 100% of the time. So, what outcome did you reach? The outcome you reached may be different than what you'd planned, but it's still an outcome. What could you have done differently to achieve your desired outcome? Well, why is that question so important? Well, your relationship to your outcome determines how you perform in life. Successful people know their outcome and accept responsibility for the results of their actions, whether good or bad. Successful people make adjustments based on those results. Unsuccessful people tend to rationalize and make excuses. Unsuccessful people complain and tell others how it could have been or how it should be. You have to know your outcome and go for it passionately. By the way, that's the secret behind the book and the movie, The Secret. You'd be working by candlelight or gas lamps had it not been for the passion, tenacity, and reframing ability of an inventor named Thomas Edison. Edison stayed focused on his outcome even though he failed in his first 1,000 attempts to create that electric light bulb. He was asked how he was still able to forge ahead with his experiments despite the 1,000 setbacks. And Edison responded, "Oh, I didn't look at it as failure. I looked at it as 1,000 ways to not make a light bulb." Every situation can be looked at one of two ways. And it's always best to choose the one that provides you with new approaches leading towards success. Reframing is more than cockeyed optimism. Reframing is a powerful and effective tool. I opened up another box of my training material this past week, and I found a pretty good amount of information that I have not yet shared with you. Here's a little story that I used in order to make the effective communicator model clear to people who really hadn't heard about it. So if you're listening for the first time, this will give you a pretty good idea of what we're referring to when we talk about the effective communicator model. The effective communicator model is made up of 3 sections, and the first one is to know your outcome and state it in the positive. The second segment is to have the sensory awareness to know if you're moving towards or away from that desired outcome. And third is to have the flexibility that if what you're doing isn't working, you have choices that allow you to do something else. Here's a great little story. This is the one that I found. A jet plane is taking off from Los Angeles and flying specifically to JFK Airport in New York City. Using the effective communicator model, what exactly do you believe the outcome is when a pilot gets on a flight to fly to New York City? Well, I believe that outcome is to reach New York City and land safely. That's an outcome stated in the positive. Now, I'm sure you can get the same results with an outcome that's based in the negative, such as, well, we're going to fly to New York today and we're going to try really hard not to crash. Now, you might indeed reach New York and you may not have crashed, but imagine trying to reach an outcome of not crashing versus getting there safely. So the pilot knows the outcome, which is to reach New York safely. Second, you have to have the sensory awareness to know whether you're moving away from or towards your desired outcome. So here is this pilot flying from New York to Los Angeles. And this pilot is a real veteran and avoids autopilot altogether. The flight's very smooth for about 90 minutes when the pilot looks casually out the cockpit window. He looks down and he sees a great big body of water. This pilot has made this flight a number of times and realizes there's no great big body of water between Los Angeles and New York. So what does the view from 30,000 feet tell this pilot? It tells this pilot, "Pilot, you're off course. There is no big body of water between Los Angeles and New York." The pilot had the sensory awareness to recognize that, and the pilot did. Now the third step comes into play, and that's to have enough flexibility to change course if you need to. If you're not achieving your outcome doing what you're doing, you really need to be able to do something else, and in this case, it's change course. One of the most phenomenally mind-boggling statistics that I've ever heard, which now seems to make sense, is that a jet plane that's flying between Los Angeles and New York City is actually on course, specifically on course, between 2 and 5% of the air time or the flight time. What is the airplane doing? Well, The airplane wants to fly where the airplane wants to fly. The airplane is reacting to the winds over its wings, its flaps, and its tail. The airplane is reacting to temperature and to altitude and doesn't always stay exactly on course. Well, what's the pilot's task during that 95 to 98% of the time that the airplane is off course? The pilot is correcting. The pilot is flexible enough to realize that the plane is off course. It doesn't really matter what caused the plane to move off course. The fact is that it is off course. And since it is off course, it's not going to reach its intended destination or its desired outcome of landing safely in New York. It may land safely in Miami, but since that isn't the desired outcome, you'd have some pretty upset passengers. So here's this airplane that's off course literally 95% of the time, and the only thing that the pilot really has to do is have the sensory awareness to know when that plane is off course and the flexibility of action and response to put it back on course. Here's another comparison, maybe even a little closer to home. When you're in your car with your hands on the steering wheel, you're not really steering all of the time. What you're really doing is correcting the direction in which your car is heading. Please avoid conducting this experiment, but just imagine yourself driving along at 5 miles per hour and you take your hands off the steering wheel. Where does the car go? It goes wherever it wants, including off the road. When you take hold of the steering wheel, you are correcting course. So, that's a good story to remember when you're thinking about the effective communicator model. If you're a student of communication or if you're just a human being, you're going to find this conversation with Dr. Mark Goulston to be very powerful and impactful. As I mentioned earlier, I suggest you listen to it twice. That's how good I think it is. Prior to meeting Dr. Mark Goulston, I heard that he was a trainer of FBI and police hostage negotiators, which I thought was fascinating. In addition to that, Mark's been a boots-on-the-ground suicide prevention-focused psychiatrist. So I asked myself, what makes someone who's invested the time and commitment necessary to become a successful psychiatrist focus on the world of communication? And before I continue with an introduction telling you more about the contributions Mark has made, I think it would be a good time to say, hello, Mark. Welcome.
Well, Ike, it's good to be with you on your podcast, and thank you for having me on, and I'm looking forward to this.
Dr. Mark chose the universe of effective communication, and in doing that, he's traveled around the world as an advisor to global influencers. And when it comes to effective communication, Mark literally wrote the book. As a matter of fact, he's written 7 of them, which includes a book that I just love, which is called Just Listen. And it's been translated into how many different languages?
23
languages. There's a lot of good listening going out there. And before we get into our conversation, I want to let you know that Mark hosts My Wake Up Call podcast, where he has conversations with influencers, including Larry King, Norman Lear, Ivan Meisner, and many more about what matters to them. But right now, what matters to me is having a conversation with Mark Goulston. So let's welcome Mark Goulston and have him share with you what got him into the field of communication.
Well, I think what got me into it was that as I looked out in the world, I seemed to be attracted to fear, anger, hurt, and I feel compelled to do something to alleviate it. And what I saw that seemed to make it worse for people is when their communication deteriorated. So when I noticed that when people would talk over or at people, I could see the animosity in them increase. And I became a student of communication. And in my book, Just Listen, I actually talk about 4 levels of talking and 4 levels of listening. And the 4 levels of talking, you can talk over, at, to, or with people. And when you talk over them, you're insulting them. When you talk at them, you're aggravating them. When you talk to them, that's business as usual. But the real gold standard is when you talk with people. When you talk with people, what I discover is people lean into that, and they lean into it. And sadly, because the majority of people in the world don't have many people that talk with them. And people are hungry for that.
One of the golden rules of the model that I share with people is that people love to talk, and it's our job as effective communicators to let them communicate and actually listen. And one of the things that I found is that people are really inefficient listeners, and I believe that's because no one has taught them how to listen.
Well, I think when you experience the world as talking over, at, or just to you, what happens is it sort of pushes you down and causes you to want to react. So you then want to almost get even with them, because when someone has talked over, at, or even to you, especially to you when you haven't asked for them for their advice or input, it kind of squishes you down, and you're like this coiled spring ready to vent. And so what you have is people venting and reacting to each other, but people not listening to each other. Something I want to share with your listeners. I go to breakfast 7 days a week with Larry King from CNN. Mm-hmm. And I'm part of this little breakfast club, and I'm the latest member. I've been going for a year. He just turned 86. And I've learned a lot by observing him, because Larry is one of the maybe the highest regarded interviewer and the most sought after person to be interviewed by, because he, as he says, he has unfiltered curiosity. He never passes judgment. He never gives advice. He never gives conclusions. And so what happens is people are not afraid to open up, because they know he's never going to ambush them. He's never going to corner them. He's never going to try and one-up them. And so people from Trump to Putin, they love to be interviewed by Larry, because when he's in that role, he believes that everyone, has some sort of reason for what they've done or what they say. So he could be speaking to a mass shooter and just calmly say, "We shot a lot of person. A lot of people. What was going on? or why that? Why that?" And I've just watched this, and I'm trying to emulate it, because I can see my own tendency to want to put in my 2 cents, my expertise, to show off what I know. And sometimes I can get away with it, but afterwards I know internally that it's come from a place where I was trying to impress them. I was trying to prove or show that I'm capable. And as I spend more time with Larry, I'm trying to emulate what he does, because I see the influence he has, which is phenomenal. He's interviewed 61,000 people.
I keep thinking of the masks everybody applies in each day when they go to work and when they go out to socialize. Who are they being in all of these? And is there a core person that if they communicated from that core person, they'd be way more powerful? And how do you teach them to be both authentic and curious?
So there's an exercise that I do with people to help them discover their authentic self. And it's very enlightening and rather sobering. And I ask people, imagine that your personality is a circle. And in the circle, there is the part of your personality, or the parts of your personality, that are trying to prove, show, hide, or please. Prove something, show something, hide something, or please. And then I ask people, I'd like you to imagine eliminating all of those and what is left. And the majority of people will pause and they will say, nothing. When I eliminate the parts of me that are trying to prove, show, hide, or please, there is nothing left. And then what I share with them as my own experience is that when I've been able to eliminate those, and it's a conscious exercise, it's just letting go. what you may discover, as I've discovered, is sometimes there will be a calling that has been beckoning out to you for decades, but you couldn't hear it because you were too busy proving, showing, hiding, or pleasing. Often that calling has just been there, but it hasn't been able to break through or reveal itself. Something else that I do, because listening is something that, I seem to get more traction and interest in listening all around the world except America. I've spoken in Moscow twice, and the audience was, and these are managers, this is not politics, these are managers, and they were the best audiences ever. And they didn't even hear me in English. They had earpieces, they heard me in Russian. But here's one of the ways that actually cause people to see the importance of listening. So here's another exercise for your listeners. I would ask you to think of someone who wants the best for you, wants the most success, happiness, and cares about your well-being. And if you were to ask that person in your mind's eye, what would be the positive impact on my success, my happiness, and our relationship if I became a better listener? Little, moderate, large. And most people would say, well, I think those people would say, well, moderate. Now here's the hooker. This is how you make something that's soft, compelling. I say, now imagine asking them, what has already been the cost to me of my happiness, success, and our relationship when I have been at my absolute worst as a listener? What would that person say in your mind's eye? And the answer is always large, because you get flashbacks of all the times you didn't listen, all the times you ran over other people, all the times you interrupted other people, all the times when you had to have the last word. Mm-hmm. And so you picture those things and you go, oh my God.
I was told years ago that I would rather be right than happy. And I looked at that and it was like someone landing a haymaker on me and just taking a look at that and saying, where else does that pop up in my life? And what is that costing me? And it really became very powerful, which leads me to just share with you something that I look to you as the cause, and I mean that in a positive way. It was probably 10 or 12 years ago, you were kind enough to attend one of my workshops. And when we were done, you said, I really enjoy what you're doing. And I think you would be even more effective if you became a little more authentic, or your voice was a little more personal. And I had heard this a lot in acting too, and I didn't realize what it was because I have this crazy range where it can be down here or way up here. It doesn't really matter. But it had nothing to do with range. It had nothing to do with anything but what you were just talking about presenting yourself in a way that you ended up looking the best that you thought you could, rather than being your authentic self. You've been a part of that all along in helping with that authenticity. So I wanted to say thank you in a way that others than you would hear it.
Well, you're welcome. And it's been a while. And I'll point something else out to you that I don't know that I said back then, but I think it applies because, I've thought of you frequently and I've quoted you many times, hundreds of times, because maybe even at least once a week. And I'll say to people do not remember better than, they remember different than. And I've used that so often. I wanted to thank you. I even had a conversation today with a company and I said, I just looked at your website and it's very professional, but it's not different than. It's kind of better than, but you're a commodity, meaning everybody's better than the next person. So the key is, how can you be different than? So I wanted to return the...
Thank you. I accept that. I love that quote. Being better is one thing. Being different is everything.
Absolutely. But the insight I wanted to share with you, and you might want to ponder it, is because I've met a number of people like you, and I'll tell you, you're one of the brightest of the lot. And so what always bothered me about you is that you were so smart and so articulate that you should stop trying to prove it. Is you're emotionally shy. And emotionally shy means it's an underdeveloped ability to be spontaneously present and vulnerable. And there's a lot of people in the world who don't want to show that because they feel scared. Their guard is down. And there's a worry that the world will take advantage of them. And it's interesting because my Wake Up Call podcast, and you're going to be on it as a guest, people basically open up. I mean, really open up. And I would say half of my guests have said it was the most open they've ever been in a public interview. And I always give everyone the option. We don't have to post this. And so far, everyone said, no, you made it safe to open up. And I want people to see that this side of me exists, because it doesn't exist spontaneously. Probably because they were saying, because I'm always trying to prove, hide, show, or please someone.
What do you tell my listener who is saying, I really want to learn this. This is important to me. And have them create that value for themselves without asking them, what will happen if you don't do it? Do you have a vision or a picture that you can create, not necessarily for me, but for anybody who wants to become more effective in different areas in their life?
Well, I'm glad you gave me the opportunity, because I spoke in Russia a couple of months ago, and I headlined with a Nobel Prize winner, and there were 3 of us. And what I spoke on, because 4 of my books are bestsellers in Russia, what I presented, and so the audience was very receptive, I said, I'm not going to talk about any of my books because I wrote them a while ago. And what I'm going to talk about is something I haven't written a book on, and I might. And I might actually write it in Russian first and have it translated into English, because my books seem to do better in Russia than America. And so this was 1,000 Russians, and I said, I'm going to change everything you know about communication, and I'm going to give you and your listeners the tip that I gave them. I said to the audience, and I'm going to say this to your listeners, I'm going to do with your listeners and with you what I did with 1,000 Russians.
Okay.
So I looked out at them and I said, if I focus on you right now, you're listening to me. And so you're listening to me for me to give you tips that you can check off, and you'll try them, and 1 or 2 of them might work, and then they won't work, and then you'll just abandon them. So if I focus on you listening to me, you'll give me your mind, and you might try it. And then I just changed my tone, and I said, but if I focus on what you're listening for, and I give you that, you won't just give me your mind, you'll give me everything. And so what I think your listeners are listening for, and what I think you're listening for as we're having this conversation, is you're listening for information that can help your listeners have better, more meaningful, more successful lives. And you're listening for actual doable by them tips where they don't have to be a genius. They don't have to buy a book. They don't have to buy a course. And what you're listening for is to be able to give your listeners value immediately that they can use so they can feel the benefit, as opposed to listening for information that is incomprehensible or information that is so brilliant that nobody can use it. Mm-hmm. And so I said that to the audience in Russia. And when I said, if I focus what you're listening for information that can help you get more results, which is what you're judged on, with less stress, which is what's causing you to drink. And that's doable by you immediately, where you don't have to buy a course, you don't have to buy a book. It's just the price of admission. Is that what you're listening for? And I got to tell you, Ike, the whole audience, 1,000 Russians flexed into me and they went, da. So if you're listening, if you can take every conversation, pause, Forget about what you're trying to prove, show, hide, or please, and just be openly, agendaless, curious about what they're listening for. In fact, it changes the way you show up in the conversation. And they might even look at you like, what are you doing? And you say, well, I'm listening for, I'm focusing on what you're listening for. And I'm trying to figure out what that is, because if I know what you're listening for and I can give you that, this will be a more satisfying conversation for you. Isn't that true? And they're going to say, yeah. Well, can you tell me what you're listening for? So you don't have to be a mind reader. And then the point is, if you get them to share what they're listening for, you can't do a bait and switch. You can't say, oh, I've got a program or I have a course that'll do that, because they're going to feel like you just took advantage of them.
Yeah, you pulled the switcheroo.
That's right. But if you can be there, and what I love to do is, I love the Miracle on 34th Street sale. So what happens is when people open up, I say, I could help you with this, but that's not what's important right now. These other things you talked about, I know 3 other people who are amazing, and I have it in my power to introduce you to them. So when I'm in conversations, I never focus on closing anyone. I focus on being of service. And if possible, I try and bring them other people, because that builds trust. Because people leave the conversation saying, this guy drove 2 hours to have a conversation with me, and he could have sold me something, but instead he said, you don't need me. What you need are these 3 other things, and I happen to know people that can deliver those if you want them.
You're speaking my language, doctor. The whole close the deal without selling conversation is based on that, of how to be of service and let people know that if you need what I offer, that's wonderful. And if you don't, we don't have to be out of relationship. Some of this stuff, as easy as it sounds, it can be a challenge for people who are used to communicating in the same way they've done since they were children. I'm so pleased that not only did Dr. Mark share with you information that kind of fortifies what you and I have been talking about, but also his information was so powerful that I was listening to it as if we were just having a conversation. So, Mark, I hope that has you be quite satisfied, because I know how important that is to you.
Well, it really is. And something we didn't speak about, but I'll just leave this.
Please.
I've started a global movement, and I did a TEDx talk to launch it, which will be up in a couple months. And the global movement is #WMYST. #WMYST. And what it stands for is, what made you smile today? And my TEDx talk was basically about a friend of mine who had a drug addict daughter, and he was avoiding her because he couldn't stand all the lying and manipulating. And every day he started texting her at 5 p.m. And he said, hey, honey, and he texted her, hey, honey, it's Dad. What made you smile today? And initially she tried to manipulate him. Oh, I thought you'd give me money. And he said, no. We've been down that road. No more money. And he just kept doing it 5 p.m. every day. And then after 6 weeks, he texted her, hey, honey, it's Dad. What made you smile today? And she replied, come on, Dad. If you must know, what made me smile today was knowing you would text me. And he started to cry, because he said that was the first conversation they'd had in years where they just liked each other. 2 months later, she was off drugs, because instead of feeling like a burden to her dad, she felt liked by him. And ever since then, this is several months ago, every day, when I run into the name-tagged faceless people in the world, the cashiers at McDonald's and Costco and the TSA agents, whenever they serve me, I say their name like I did to Carmen at McDonald's. Carmen, thank you. My name is Mark. Can I ask you a question? No, you're not in trouble, Carmen. What made you smile today? And Carmen gave me the best response. Most people say it's a great day waking up. And she looked at me and just smiled, and she said, seeing you, sweetie.
Well, you just made me smile.
And we give out wristbands. If you go to WMYST.org, it's a nonprofit. We're changing the world one smile at a time. And I give out wristbands. So I meet someone, I give it a wristband. It says hashtag WMYST. And I say, here's 2 wristbands. Wear one because you got a great smile. You got to use it every day. And the second one, do to someone else what I just did to you. Just spread it around. So I do that every day.
That is beautiful. Again, I know of no better way that we could bring this conversation to a conclusion than to have me sitting here with this Cheshire Cat grin on my face going, Carmen, I love you.
I loved her too.
That's just marvelous. Mark, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to share your wisdom and a little bit of your communication information with our listeners. And I know if they're half as delighted as I am to have had you here, this will be a real big win for all of us. Thank you again.
Thanks for having me on, Ike.
After that marvelous conversation, the only coaching I can offer you is go out and listen for. That's going to do it for this episode. It sure was packed. And as I said before, I think it was ultra valuable. Remember to follow Close the Deal Without Selling on LinkedIn and Facebook. This is Ike Krieger. See you next time.